I'm really excited for our speaker today. Oasis, from the very beginning, which has been about a year and a half now, has always tried to dance the fine line of trying to make sure that we be as accepting and open as possible with all different kind of schools of thought, maybe beliefs, value systems, as long as they're inclusive, loving, compassionate, that kind of thing. And sometimes different belief systems, value systems can collide in that way and can conflict. But one thing that we've tried as much as possible to not compromise on, bring the lights down. One thing that we've tried to not compromise on as much as possible is inclusiveness within, and I'm going to butcher the way that I'm talking about this, and all the allies can correct me, and that's great. But trying to be as inclusive of all different minority types, oppressed groups as possible. And last week we had a booth up at the Pride, and had the chance to talk with a lot of different people, both Utah County, Salt Lake County, and I'm really excited to try and I think that we've had a number of speakers about this, but I'm really excited to continue to try and find out what Oasis can do within the community to create a better, stronger push for equality and inclusiveness and compassion within the LGBTQIA plus community, so that just so that we can have a better community. So I'm really excited for our speaker today. I'm going to read an exceptionally long intro, which I think will be worth it. So, she is a professor in the Department of Teacher Education in the David O. McKay School of Education at Brigham Young University, where she teaches courses in literacy and multicultural education. She is a former high school mathematics teacher, is particularly proud of her work serving students at risk of not graduating from high school. She earned her graduate degrees from the University of Nevada, Reno, an MS in secondary education, and a Ph.D. in curriculum and instruction with a focus on literary studies. She began her work as a scholar investigating disciplinary literacies and seeking to uncover the texts and literacies needed to participate and learn in disciplinary settings such as mathematics, science, and the arts. Her work has appeared in various journals for researchers and teachers, including the Harvard Educational Review, the American Educational Research Journal, and the Journal of Teacher Education, the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, and the Mathematics Teacher. She's an editor and contributor to the books Reimaging Content, Area Literacy Instruction, and Arts Education and Literacies. Currently, her research interest has focused on teacher education and the challenge of straight teacher educators preparing straight teachers to create safe and affirming classrooms for LGBTQ plus children and families. In addition to her work at the university, she serves as the vice president of the local PFLAG chapter, PFLAG program, Utah County, on the board of the ACLU of Utah, on the board of Encircle, and is one of the faculty advisors for BYU USGA, which is a group of LGBTQ BYU students and their allies that meet weekly at the Provo Library. She is a student, a friend, a mother, a knitter, a wife, an activist, a mother-in-law, a hugger, a citizen, a grandmother, a friend, an aunt, I don't want to butcher this, is it Yurok? American Indian, a sister, a warrior, a Mormon, a daughter, an optimist, a neighbor, and a baker of pies, not in any particular order. Please welcome Dr. Roni Jo Draper.
I just speak so I can hear people introduce me. Thank you for that. Am I going to get feedback? I have written words. We'll see if I attend to those. I submitted a title for this talk about a week and a half ago, and so I understand that you are here to perhaps hear words about hope and peace and community. I'm not going to talk about that at all, and sorry, you can leave, there's downstairs. I am going to talk about my work as a multicultural educator. and the work that I do on BYU campus, trying to think about how I work as a straight cisgender person, trying to help my students in particular create classrooms that are safe for LGBTQ children and their families. I'll start with, we had a wonderful introduction. I'll share some more things. There was a string of identities that I hold on to at the end, and I'll share a little bit more about those. And I'll talk a little bit about myself, my journey to becoming a teacher educator. And then I want to talk about some of the challenges I face as a teacher educator, particularly on BYU campus. And then I'm going to talk about my turn to queer pedagogy as my approach to teacher education and what that looks like and why I use that and why I think that can be a way for us to think about our work as humans in terms of thinking about how we approach our humanity and the way that we can be more inclusive. And so, I appreciate what Lance's words were about thinking about how do we become more inclusive? How do we reach out? I think that if we attend to queer theory and what that offers us in the way of thinking, that can be really useful. So I'll talk about that. So I grew up not LDS. I think that's important to understand because I didn't grow up in a homophobic home. That's really important to understand. I also grew up biracial. My father is Yurok American Indian. He was born and raised on an Indian reservation in Northern California. And my mother was white, like totes white. She was Norwegian, hence I'm a knitter. I don't know if you know that about Norwegians. If you're Norwegian, you have to knit. I know that we're not supposed to really fall into cultural stereotypes. But I dare you to find a Norwegian that doesn't know how to cast on and knit girl. So anyway, I ran into a kid once in Desert Book, and we were talking, and he said, "Oh, I just got back from mission from Norway," and I said, "Oh, then you must know how to knit." And he was like, "Yeah, I do." I was like, "I know." So anyway. So I grew up in this biracial home, and so my father was very brown, and my mother was very white, and I went to school, and I was a bright child, and I loved taking tests. I know that seems weird, but it explains a lot about who I am. And the hardest question always for me on a test, I grew up in the 70s, so it was before people were really woke. But the hardest question for me on a test was always to identify my nationality or my ethnicity, because it always told me to identify one, right? And so I would sit there and go, okay, American Indian or white. I didn't really think, I'd be like a 7-year-old girl thinking, who do I deny today? My mother or my father? I was really prepared to do really well on the rest of the test. That one was a real stumper for me. So anyway, I have this background of understanding what it means to grow up with this sort of racial difference. While at the same time, I understand that I present very white, which is very different from my brother, very different from my father, and really, frankly, very different from one of my children. One of my children looks very white. One of my children is adopted, so he looks white. And one of my children is darker than I am, and people speak Spanish to him. And this is a North American Indian, completely English. So I get that I move through the world as someone who appears to be white, and I work from that privilege, and that gives me a lot of insight about white privilege because I'm able to do that, and I have that experience. I also grew up in a working class poor home. I am the product of Head Start. I don't know if you are familiar with that program. It's a program for young children to attend preschool who come from low-income homes. Our family qualified, so I went to Head Start. I was very excited because I love school. And so I went to Head Start when I was 4, and I've never stopped going to school. And so I understand, you know, I understand what it is like to grow up in, not abject poverty, not the poverty that my father understood, where he grew up in the 40s without electricity, without running water, in the United States, but certainly with a modicum of poverty where, it was really rare to get really new clothing and not just clothing that was handed down from neighbors or from relatives or whatever. So anyway, I understand that part. And I certainly understand what it's like to be discriminated against because of my gender. Right? I majored in mathematics in the 80s. Come now. I typically was one of maybe 2 women in an engineering physics class in the 80s, where professors often wouldn't answer my questions. They would dismiss my questions. I've had professors say to me, "I'm not answering a question from you because you're here as a hobby." And I would think, this is my major. I'm paying for this class, like a lot of the other people here. But I wouldn't be able to, I couldn't have my questions answered. I've also been dismissed by professors who wouldn't accept my answers to questions. So I've been in classes where I was the only woman in a mathematics classroom. I was about to answer a question and the professor said, no, I'm not doing that. Or right in the middle of my answer. And I said, oh, okay. And then a man started answering the question, giving the exact answer I was giving. And the professor was like, yeah. But being the person I am, I said, oh, so it's okay if he has that answer, but it's not okay if I have that answer. And the professor said, oh, was that how you were going to solve this problem? And I said, yeah. So it didn't make any difference, but we still just experienced that over and over. I was also not invited to participate in study groups with men until I proved myself on an early test when I got a 96%. Then I was invited to a study group, but I thought, I don't even need the study group, clearly. You all may just bring me down. Like, what are you going to do for me? So anyway, so I had experienced discrimination. I had experienced a lot of things. So teaching a multicultural class seemed quite natural. I worked with students who were at risk of not graduating from high school. They were mostly kids who were growing up in poverty, kids who didn't speak English as their first language, kids who were racial minorities, kids who were already been through the criminal justice system, kids who were already experiencing addiction to different kinds of substances. We had a variety of issues in my classroom, and so I had already done that from a teacher's side as well. So I really felt well prepared to teach a multicultural class. That wasn't really the challenge, right? But the challenge still, I haven't experienced everything, right? I haven't experienced life as a black man. And I try as I might, that is not going to be an experience I'm going to know. I have not experienced life as a queer woman. I haven't. I can imagine some things, but I'm never going to know exactly what that experience is. I haven't been homeless. There are just a myriad of social situations that we talk about in my class. From race to immigration to language to gender, sexuality, all those kinds of issues that while I have experienced a lot of things that maybe whatever a typical white middle class LDS person who finds himself in my teacher preparation class has an experience, I haven't experienced everything. At any rate, even if I had experienced one thing, or the experiences I've had, I'm not able to speak for everybody else anyway, right? Even as a biracial, Euroc, American, straight woman who has experienced discrimination as someone who's majored in a STEM field. That's a really narrow, kind of specific thing. It's not like I can speak for all women or all humans who've experienced similar kinds of things. And my experiences are really particular to me, and I can't speak for a whole group of individuals, right? So, anyway, this is a challenge that I face. My students come into my class at BYU, and they sit down and they proclaim themselves as probably a lot of people that you ever meet, or maybe that you ever are, proclaim themselves as non-racists, right? They sit down and go, oh, I don't even know why I have to take a multicultural class. I don't even know why this class is required of all teachers. I'm not a racist. I have no prejudices. All children are children of God, and that's all I see. And I go, yeah, I know. I get you. And I know that when they say that they're genuine, right? I know that they're not trying to hide the truth, and they're not trying to just like figure out how to get out of a class so they can, do something else. And so I've been really stumped. How do I do this? How do I teach this class? I want to stand up, much like I'm standing up right now, and just put on the mic and just rock it, and just like get all preachy and just like wander back and forth and just preach it out and have my students shout amen, and I feel it. Right? But that doesn't work. And what the other challenge for me is that when I was a mathematics teacher, that I experienced it all the time at BYU, I tell my students something that I think is just the truth, like racism exists in the United States. And then they're like, I don't know if we should write this down. I'm not sure this is a fact. But when I was a high school mathematics teacher, like I would say things like, this is a quadratic formula. My students would write that down. Like they never doubted me. I'm not used to being doubted as a teacher. My students never said, quadratic formula, I think that just might be your opinion. Right? Where now my students are like, sexism, I think that might just be your opinion. I think you might just be imagining things, Dr. Draper. So I've had to figure out how to deal with this. And I don't want to put myself in a position where it's me against my students, right? I want to be on the side of my students. I've always wanted to do that. I always want to be that person as a teacher, because that's a better place to be. I don't want to be adversarial in the moment of teaching. I very much teach from the perspective and have desire to teach from the perspective of Paulo Freire, the great Brazilian educator, who talked about the idea that as teachers we have to avoid the banking model of teaching. That idea that I can, as a teacher, deposit information into the willing, empty minds of students, and that at some point later come back and expect a withdrawal of that same information later. And that model doesn't really work. That we have to do something a lot more dialogic, and that when we do that, when we engage in that kind of dialogic conversation as learner and teacher, as learner and teacher, that everybody in the room will create his or her own understanding. And it's not all going to look alike, and that's okay, because we're all humans and we don't look alike, and so why would our meanings look alike also? And so what I've done more recently, and don't tell my students because they don't know, they think I'm just doing an okay job, but they don't know the words. I've turned to queer pedagogy. And so from a queer pedagogy perspective, see, I'm not even using my notes, I don't need this at all. It's really hindering me, I can't use this. With queer pedagogy, what I do, instead of offering facts ready-made for my students, what I offer them instead is the opportunity to question their own relationship to knowledge. Okay, so what I do is I give them the readings, and maybe the readings that any other multicultural educator would give students in any given semester. It's not really any different. But instead of asking them to find information and to locate facts and to see things that they agree with, disagree with, so that we can argue whether things are true or not true, and I can prove to them it's true, and I can show them the errors of their logic and all those sorts of things, I ask them instead to read the information, the text that we've given, and I've asked them to read them in a queer way. I don't have to say that either. And by that, what I do is I ask them to read and notice their own disruptions. At what point during the reading do they get uncomfortable? Where do they get kind of ooped out a little bit? And I use that word. Do they understand that? They got really troubled by that word. Where do they read and they're disquieted, they're disrupted, and that they need to pause and then ask themselves, what about this is disrupting me? So that they're not asking, is this true? Is this false? Where is the evidence for this information? How can I trust this? How does the author, where's the authority of the author to say this or to not say this? Instead, they ask themselves, why does this bother me? And what if this was true? Like, what would it cost me to believe that this is true? What would it benefit me if I believed that this was true? If I took this up as truth? Who benefits if this is true? Who loses if this is true? Who loses if I don't pick this up? Right? So who loses if I don't allow children to use the restroom in a school that corresponds with the gender identity that they proclaim? Who loses from that? What's the cost of that? What does it cost me? What does it cost society? What does it cost that child? What does it cost other children? Who benefits? Who benefits from banning transgender children from using the bathroom that they identify with? And so that we have that discussion. So that we don't have to ask the question, is it right or wrong to allow transgender children to be themselves? Which you can kind of already see where my bias is. But we can ask ourselves the question of why would this policy suddenly appear, and who benefits, who loses? And we can talk about that. And that we can have this discussion around it. And that discussion then is very uncomfortable, right? Because it would be much more comfortable to say, well, God says, well, science says, well, this like DNA thing, and what about body parts? It's much easier to go there because that is so outside of my own heart and my own identity. But when I ask myself to say, well, what would it cost me to open a bathroom door? What would it cost me to let a child dress however he or she or they desired for Halloween or Hero Day or whatever? What is the direct cost to me? And what is the direct benefit of the child? When I start asking those questions, then those questions become a lot more about me. And those become a lot more uncomfortable. And so those are the questions that I ask my students to ask and to consider. In those conversations then, what's really nice is I'm not pitted against my students. And I'm not asking them, I'm not trying to shove like a particular viewpoint down their throat. I then stand on their sides and be with them in the conversation. I also take the time to consider my own biases and to consider my own prejudices and my own discomforts as I listen to what they present. When I get frustrated, maybe, with ideas that they're presenting, and then I ask myself, well, why is this discomforting to me? Why is this a disruption for me? So that we can have that conversation. And then I can tell them, I'm not asking you to change your mind. I am asking you to consider the question. Because as teachers and as humans, we ought to be considering the question. And so that's how I approach my teaching. I will end by reading this quote that has been with me as long as I've been teaching. It's from Khalil Gibran, who is the author of the book called The Prophet. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but it is a lovely volume, and it's something that I return to frequently. He has a section in that book called about the teacher. And he says that the teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. And this is what I aspire to do. I try not to recreate my students in my own image. I don't want them to be me, because heaven knows, that'd be too much. But I want them to be themselves. I want them to be better versions of themselves. And I want them to walk beside me, and I want to walk beside them. Because I want them to come to the edges of their own mind, and I want to have the opportunity to come to the edge of my own mind as well. And we can only do that by coming together and working together. And I think that queer pedagogy and the opportunity that is to ask ourselves, well, what is my mind? And why have I chosen this as my mind? And what if I chose something else? And what if the things right now that I'm taking for granted as normal, what if I expanded that to include more things? And what if I continue to expand that so that more people, more bodies, more histories, more kinds of folks could be included in that normal? For me, I think that as we do that, we will be able to realize a better humanity. It's not just because it's more lovely. It's not just because it's more beautiful. It's because we will be able to find better solutions to the problems that face us as humans, because we'll have more minds, more perspectives, more talents, more knowledge, more skills brought to the understanding, to solve problems and to figure things out. If we only have the same minds trying to work on things, Congress, we will continue to have the same solutions that are not maybe always beautiful and lovely and working. If we want to have better solutions, we need to expand the kinds of people we're bringing to the problem solving. We have to widen that circle. We have to expand who we bring into the conversation. And to do that, we have to expand our own minds. So, thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for allowing me not to speak on the topic I had told you I was going to speak on. And I think now I'm just opening up for some questions. Yes, sir. In the back.
Oh, it's me?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been very intrigued and fascinated by this talk. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've been totally blind for my life, so though the discrimination you talked about is very different from the discrimination I've experienced, it resonated some.
Sure.
The thing I was thinking though is the idea of being included in the normal actually kind of scares me a little bit, because I get my motivation and drive to contribute really kind of paradoxically from being excluded. That gives me the drive to want to include myself more. And so I think if I was treated like a normal person initially, I perhaps wouldn't be able to contribute as much. So what I'm wondering is, you know, I'm all for inclusion and acceptance of all of different people and their perspectives and experience. I think that's essential. But how do we do that without taking away the drive that a lot of people get to add their solutions to the problem that, in a sense, comes from, I would argue, the positive side of being marginalized to a point?
Yeah, I think part of it is maybe thinking about how we can be inclusive without necessarily marginalization. I think, you know, wondering how we can help people continue to maintain identity while still being inclusive. You know, so how can somebody like you, as a blind person, still maintain an identity that that you can appreciate? What are the benefits? What do you gain? What do you learn? What is particular to your human experience because of your blindness that you want to bring that is special and beautiful about that? But that doesn't roll you into sort of like a smearing melting pot of normalcy. Does that make sense?
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to push you to the margins of society and be oppressive to you. Does that make sense?
Right, and I'm not saying oppression is good. I'm just saying, I guess I think for me normal is self-marginalizing to a point, and how do we not alienate people like that?
Right. I think part of it is, and I think maybe a part of it, again, is a longer conversation, that how do we maintain identities and be able to allow people to have identities that are peculiar or interesting or in and of themselves, and own those without being hurtful at the same time, right? So I can say to somebody, which I have said, you know, I'm very proud to be a biracial person. I don't move through the world. I don't see myself as a white person. And that when people say to me, "Oh, but it's okay, like you don't." It's okay, like I don't see you as a brown person. I'm like, stop it. I want you to see me as a brown person. I'm declaring my brownness. Will you please notice it about me? But I think I kind of see that, I kind of hear that as what you're saying. You don't want people to stop noticing you as a blind person because we're just wrapped up in this normalcy.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. You said it better than I did.
We want to maintain that, and we want to maintain the beauty of what comes from our particular experiences, and we want people to notice that. My father, you know, when people say, "Well, I'm colorblind," and I say, "Well, my father tells me that every day he looks in the mirror, he notices that he's brown." Like, how do you miss that? Because he's noticing that he's an American Indian. It's really a shame that somehow you're skipping over that point. And so it's not that we don't, you know, it's not that you don't notice it, but that you maybe can figure out how to notice and not make it an issue that causes you to marginalize somebody.
Yeah, okay, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, that clarification.
So, first of all, what do you call it if you don't call it queer pedagogy?
Oh yeah.
I don't call it anything. I just here's what we're doing, and my students are like, okay, this is weird. And I go, yeah, this is hard because you're at university and you're expected to focus on knowledge, and I'm asking you to focus on something else, and you're going to want to focus on knowledge, and I'm asking you to focus on And I use big words like, you want to focus on epistemology, and I'm asking you to focus on ontology, and that's really hard. And they go, yeah, that is hard, and then we keep going, and I never tell them that we're doing queer pedagogy.
Okay, and the second part is, it would be really easy to take this and use it like in political thinking and,
Sure.
and other ways of doing things, correct?
Yeah. Yes, because it would be really useful. I mean, it's really useful for me, as somebody who, takes up an identity as a more liberal person, right? To read something that's written by a conservative, right? It would be really easy for me to say, wrong. I don't want to read this. But it is advantageous to me, and it's advantageous to the conversation to instead say, okay, why is this disruptive? What is gained from this point of view? Who benefits? Who loses? And I still might not take up that point of view, but it allows me to enter the conversation. It allows me to learn more about myself and understand where I stand and where the push points are. And it allows me even to maybe understand the errors of my own thinking and to realize that maybe I'm stuck in a position not because it's the right decision or the right idea, but because I really love that bias and I am not ready to let it go. And that is not a really good reason to hold on to a bias. And so, yeah, it is useful for any of my reading to approach it queerly and to be willing to ask myself those questions. But it is difficult to take up that kind of reading.
And how many students have you had come back and admit that you never have been racist?
Almost all of them. Almost all of them are like, oh my gosh, just before this class I thought I wasn't racist, but now you know that I'm racist. I go, I didn't tell you you're racist, you noticed that yourself. Good job. And I say, we're all a little bit racist. Just come on in. Welcome. And now it's not a matter of whether you're racist or not. Now it's a matter of what you're going to do about it. Because being racist isn't really the problem. Being discriminatory, being mean, being, supporting segregation, doing all those are the problems. So now let's figure out how to do that.
So if you had students really just not be able to do this and push back, and what kind of way was there pushback, and how did you get around it, if at all? Where has this been done wrong or not?
I get, the pushback I get, is that my students, what they really have a hard time with is, they can find themselves having biases and having prejudices, and they're kind of okay with that. Because at the beginning of the semester, I say, we all come by our biases really naturally, right? And we don't have to be, we grow up with them, they happen to us naturally, just like we learn language, we learn biases. So we don't have to be all up in a fret about it. We just have to notice now. But the really disturbing thing for my students, and this is disturbing for a lot of people, is understanding that their family taught them these things and to have to pull their family off of a pedestal, or that their church taught them things and have to pull their church off of a pedestal, or that their school taught them things. They're all becoming teachers, and school is almost more sacred than anything, and pull schools off of a pedestal. That America taught them things, and America has to pull off of a pedestal. We're pulling so many things off of pedestals, and that is so hard. And when I say things like white supremacy is built into the Constitution of the United States, my students are like, nah. And I'm like, okay, let's go back to the the 3/5 rule. And they're like, that's written? And he goes, yeah, it's written. There are numbers and letters actually written.
We needed these amendments to give.
Yeah, and they just, and queer theory helps us understand that we have limits to our knowledge. There are things that we cannot bear to know, and there know. And that queer theory then helps us understand, it helps me to be really gentle with them and to understand that I'm taking them up to a limit. I'm asking them to know hard things that they do not want to know about their country, about their family, about their church, about themselves, and that I need to understand that I'm asking them to do an extremely hard thing, and that it's so painful. And so that when we talk about race, when we talk about poverty, when we talk about there isn't a meritocracy in the United States, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps like that. That's physically not a thing that's possible. When we talk about the problem with pitying people because of disability, they're like, oh no, but we thought like heaven, you're not being made whole. Like that's not an excuse for pitying people in this life. That's not a thing. That God isn't happy about that. You know that everything gets smashed. And by the time we get to gender and sexuality, those things are really difficult because I'm asking them to take a step of faith really away from what they understand their prophets have told them, and to say, well, okay, take that, put that in a bundle, and now let's think about science. And understand that you're going to be public servants, and so you have to know these things. And I'm not asking you to question your faith, but I'm asking you to, as someone who's committing to children and families outside of a church setting, I'm asking you to know these things, to know this vocabulary, and to be committed to doing these sorts of things because you are in a public setting. And can you commit to those things? If not, maybe you should be going into advertising or something easy like civil engineering or something, rocket science. That's not hard. Because this is too important when we're talking about human children and human families and human lives. And for the most part, they get there and they appreciate that conversation.
I have one more question.
So, understanding that given that you do have, with students in this situation, that you do have, you do have an advantage a little bit where you have a classroom and the ethos that comes with being a professor. I'm sure that there's more setup that goes into it, just above and beyond just I'm the teacher, therefore, right? And so taking that piece, which is, the setup, the creating an environment where you can talk about that, what advice would you have about using that in a day-to-day setting with, because in my mind, like the backfire effect comes strongly to mind for conversations like this, right? And so how would you be able to talk with somebody about a topic such as this in a way that isn't going to get immediate kickback, where you can help someone or even help yourself, whatever that means, to approach that and get to that uncomfortable line? Right.
So part of the challenge for me is not to take advantage of the power differential that I have, that advantage I have as a professor and a student, right? And that it would be really easy for me to take advantage of, well, I'm your teacher, therefore you must you must do these things. Because in the moment of the semester, they could totally yield to that. But in the long term, when they go out to actually serve children, that can be all undone because I'm not present to, hey, remember what I said. So that is not really advantageous, right? So then the other thing is, like, I have to be really disciplined that I'm not trying to change a mind. And I think that when we get into conversations with people and we're sort of, in this sort of battle of wits, that we find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to change another person's mind. We can't do that. right? We can take them to the edge of their own mind, we can walk with them, but when I'm in the middle of trying to change a person's mind, I'm no longer working with them. I'm in this adversarial moment, right? We're going head to head. And as soon as I'm going head to head with somebody, I need to walk away. Like, the jig is up. There's no winning. I can't win, the person can't win, the conversation can't win, nothing wins. Everybody loses. Somebody has to lose. Somebody comes out bloody. It's a violent moment. And so this goes back to what I maybe was supposed to talk about. No peace can be made there. What I have to do instead, and this goes back to like this queer pedagogical moment, is that I have to be disciplined enough to say, okay, so that's what you believe. I'm hearing what you're saying. So who benefits from that? Who loses from that? At what cost do you hold that? Who are you willing to sacrifice for that opinion? Who continues to win? And those are the questions you keep asking. Because that allows a person to verbalize their own logic and to be able to hear their own logical ends to what they're saying, right? So that you don't have to make a point with them, right? And you don't have to force anybody to change their mind. Like that doesn't work, and it's not a thing, and we have to get out of that game. Because you don't want anyone to force you to change your mind. Because that feels violent, and that is not peaceful, and that's not how community is made. So why would you think someone else wants you to force them to change their mind? And so that is what we always have to remember. And that is the hardest thing to remember as a human. It's hard to remember as a teacher because I'm already put in a position over people. It's super hard to remember as a parent because I want my kids to get in line, or maybe that's just how I approach parenting.
Well, that's one thing I was going to say. It's like teaching and I have older kids like you do, and you teach them, it sounds like you're teaching them critical thinking.
Right.
So you're not really trying to teach them, you're not trying to get them to change their mind, you're trying to teach them how to critically think, to figure out what their mind is.
Right.
And that's the most important.
So when your child says, I am doing these things, you don't say,
need to know why
you
you're
don't
saying
say,
those things. That you
what
don't
are
make them
you doing? And you say, is that a good idea? Like, how did you come to that decision? Like, who benefits from that? Who's at risk when you do that? Who might also that be a problem for?
The worst part is when you ask somebody why they're doing something and they give you a rote answer for it instead of being able to give you their reason why.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
I think so, and I think that and maybe this is a conversation that goes way beyond like today, but I think that part of what I'm interested in is the situation, right? Because the students have a reason to be there, their grades, their all that kind of thing, and you have a reason to be there.
Right.
And the only other place that seems to bring people together like that is Facebook, and those conversations don't usually involve, right? And so, how would one create a safe situation where a conversation like that could happen, right? And in a way that would be effective, I guess that.
Yeah. But I think that happens when people create like dinner groups or book clubs can be that possibility. Other kinds of study groups or smaller, intimate groups where people want to come together and converse. It only works really, again, going back to what we talked about before, if you bring in a diversity of thought. If you sit around with all like-minded people, you're all going to high-five each other and talk about how you're wonderful, and just like, how come all the other people in the world can't think like we do? I don't know. It's like to get the dessert. And so that's not that helpful. It means inviting people to your home that maybe you have had a Facebook argument with and saying, yeah, this isn't going to be a good place to have this conversation. Let's have barbecue at my house, or let's break some bread, and then let's just really talk about this. And how do you come to these ideas, and how do I come to my ideas? And maybe we read something together, and then we talk about that. Those are hard conversations to have. They're very vulnerable, but those are the more important conversations to have. We often joke about, as a society, the conversations we're not allowed to have at Thanksgiving, right? And we have, they're like, these are all, the big rules. These are all the things we're not allowed to talk about at Thanksgiving. But for crying out loud, because those are the things, these are the people that you're most close to, and those are the things you're not allowed to talk about. Like, where are you going to have those hard conversations if not around a turkey drumstick? So
we have just started a group. It's Holly's. That's what I was asking. That's what I was looking for a minute ago. Holly was here. It's a nonviolent communication group to get together. It's an Oasis group to talk about things like this.
Yeah.
And just to open dialogue. So that's awesome.
Let's do one more quick question, and then we're going to call it good.
I'm really excited that you're allowed to have these conversations at BYU. And it sounds like maybe things are changing. Is that really, you're not a rogue operation that isn't sanctioned by the administration? That the things you're talking, things I've heard about situations in the past that haven't gone well for certain types of education that maybe have resulted in dismissal from the university.
Well, I think that what I'm doing, and partly why it makes sense, and maybe the queer pedagogy even makes more sense for these conversations, is that I'm not preaching a particular view or not a view, right? I'm asking people to say, when students say, well, I think that the problem is, I don't mind people being gay, but I don't want to see public displays of affection. Okay, so that comes up in class. It's like, okay, so let's talk about that. So who benefits from, gay people not having public displays of affection? Who gets hurt by that? What are the benefits to society? What are the benefits to individuals? How does that benefit you? How does that hurt you? How does that hurt children? How do it benefit some children? And so then we can kind of pick that all apart, right? I'm not saying one way is right or another way is wrong, right? We're just opening that conversation.
You mentioned that there might be opportunity or times where the church or school might be pulled off the pedestal. I can imagine there might be some that would frown upon the church being pulled off the pedestal.
But I think really the church is more open than we understand, right? The church has released essays about past racism in the church. The church has, they're pretty open about how their approach to immigration. They're open about what they think about poverty. My students are often very surprised by the positions that the church takes up. They're not aware of those positions, and that sort of shakes them up a little bit. They're not aware of the church website, mormonandgay.org, and that freaks them out at first. Like, is this actually a church website? Like, yes. Like, do the work, figure out how this is an actual church website. And so that makes them, maybe I shouldn't say it pulls a church off the pedestal. It pulls their current perceptions of what the church is off a pedestal, and it forces them to replace their views of the church that are probably more accurate of what the church actually is. And that feels very disruptive to them, and it can be very disruptive because their family hasn't done that kind of replacement, and so that makes for very awkward conversations with their parents or their spouses or whatever, and so that becomes really uncomfortable for them. But I don't think that I do anything. I really work hard because I don't want my students to have to give up their faith, just like I wouldn't want anybody in this room to have to give up their faith. I don't want people to have to fundamentally change their beliefs or to change their identities in order to take up new ideas. I want people to do that on their own. I don't want to prescribe that. And so I don't want that for my students either. And so that, for that, I think that, that doesn't put me, of course, in any danger as a BYU professor, because that, I'm not doing anything subversive in that way.
If you had taught the same class 20 years ago, BYU would
Well, maybe not, because I think that the church's position on homosexuality was very different 20 years ago, right? And maybe even the church's position on race was very different 20 or 40 years ago, right? And so those conversations perhaps would have had to be very different. And so, yeah, definitely.
There's one that probably wouldn't be teaching the class.
True that. Like, how does a woman with a Ph.D. get hired at BYU 40 years ago? I don't know. Not one that's married and has children at home, as I did when I was hired at BYU nearly 20 years ago. So, anyway, I have to shut up now. So, thank you for being willing to listen to me jabber. I always appreciate that. And let me know. I think my email is available. I'm on Facebook. If you want to shoot me a question, I'm happy to keep chatting.
Keep that mic up for just 1 second. Real quick question, a couple of questions. Do you have a website or a blog, or are you on Facebook?
I'm on Facebook.
Some way that people can.
I don't have a blog, but I am on Facebook, and my Facebook is completely public, and so people can find me there.
Okay, cool. So the approach, the queer pedagogy, that approach, do you have kind of that loosely documented anywhere, or concretely documented anywhere? Steps that you kind of generally approach?
Yeah, and it's not like out of my own head, like this is, there are people who are smarter than me who came up with these ideas.
Okay.
And I just read them, and so, but yeah, I can put together words for you if you would like, and some ideas
and
about.
maybe some of where you got books for people. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
I really, today I came very much anticipating the talk today, and it became even better.
Thank you.
I'm really excited for what we have. So let's give a round of applause to Dr.